Good evening and welcome to the Perspecticast, the podcast companion to the Panda Perspective Substack. It's not been that long since our previous episode, but we have quite a few missed weeks to catch up on. But in all seriousness, I thought it is important to record a kickoff episode before we start on the semiconductors, because it's a big undertaking. It'll take us all the way through August and likely into September. And quite frankly, is my belief that it's important to talk about the undertaking that's in front of us, because it's not a trivial task. It's a very big sort of chunk of subject matter. It's a big chunk of the Chinese economy. It's a big chunk of Chinese policy that we ought to get right, quite frankly. And I have to say that the fact that I haven't gotten to them earlier just highlights how challenging a subject matter it really is. And there is perhaps a desire to downplay it a little and just say, well, just look at the big guys, just look at specialists in area X or Y. I disagree. I feel like if one were to start down this path, one ought to have a plan to reaching the very end. One ought to really figure it out. However, before we get on to that, I would like to formally apologize for a small mishap that happened earlier in the day. I have released a attribution report for the Panda portfolio for the full subscribers, and that attribution report unfortunately contained unforced errors. Again, this has everything to do with the fact that with the closure of Pacat, I am migrating to doing everything myself effectively, and also figuring out how to write tools from the ground up, especially for performance attribution and things like that. And the result this time around was that we have missed, between myself and the tools, we have missed the BYD bonus share attribution that made up for the big drop in June, in July, and that blew up a whole bunch of performance numbers. But the top line didn't change, like the actual 12 and a bit percent is an accurate number. But it's the attribution to the individual names that was incorrect. I've written up the updated write-up and the visuals, and they will be posted in that very same article shortly after this is live. So if you're interested in that, do please check it out. Again, apologies, but I mean, thankfully, no client money is involved in any of that. All of it is purely for the record, therefore no harm done, I suppose, in one way, but one ought to hold oneself to a higher standard than that. So we will make sure that that doesn't happen again. With that, let's kick off the coverage of the semiconductors. The first article that we're going to be publishing will focus on the comparisons between what we have in the East and what we have in the West, right? The different types of semiconductor companies out there, what they're like, comparing things between themselves. TSMC versus Intel, SMIC versus Intel versus TSMC, Huawei versus Global Foundries, that sort of thing, right? Not exactly scientific because, of course, in modern day semiconductor world, no two companies are exactly the same, and, one ought to be very upfront about it. Nevertheless, it's important to at least conceptualize some of these things. And through that, we'll also conceptualize the shape that the following articles will take. So once we're done with the comparisons, we'll move on to the strategic foundation and what kind of government policy and market encouragement is being done by the government as of August 2025, how it developed historically and where we are now. Again, this being China, it's a very important piece. I'm contemplating making Article 2 broadly available. I am open to feedback on the subject matter. If anybody has any strong convictions one way or the other, let me know. On the one hand, it's very important. On the other, it's not going to have any specific company takes, recommendations, or anything like that. It's just going to be an overview kind of article. Skeleton of it is more or less done. The question is, as with so many of these things, is because I tend to do like a broad sort of deep dive on everything, and then I split it up into articles. So I never quite know exactly, especially on this multi-article sort of plan, where these government things end up. So one option is to put everything into one article and just discuss the government stuff and then refer to it in the future articles. Or the other way around, make sure that individual ecosystems, individual subsets have their own policy discussion. Something I will ponder but I'm currently thinking it would make sense to focus on the government input in Article 2 and just kind of then just light touch as we go. Then we want to touch on manufacturing tools ecosystem. Who's actually making all the equipment for the people who are making the semiconductors? Now, of course, we ought to compare how it goes compared to, the ASM, the Nikons of the world, and how the Chinese and the Japanese models differ. But again, to me, I learned the most in sort of working up details for that article. So that'll be a very interesting one. And then we'll be addressing foundries, memory makers, AI computing specialists, process design, power semiconductor makers, smartphone semiconductor specialists, of which there are many, as it turns out. We're going to do a cheeky look at the analog semiconductor makers and how they compare to tower. Lots and lots of sort of subgenres there. And now, obviously, we'll look at connectivity guys, so guys who are making RF and optical communication semiconductors and things like that. Then we'll touch on assembly guys. It's a smaller sort of subset, but kind of big enough, just about big enough to sort of warrant their own coverage. But interestingly enough, mostly non-Chinese, but mostly like Taiwanese guys there. So another question I had, do I go with it or not? But yeah, I think it's important. I think the way it fits in with the rest of the story, I think it's important. And then, obviously, design and services guys, all of it, PCB and materials, all of it deserves its own look. And then, of course, I want to wrap it up with future frontiers, sort of like emerging technologies outlook. Some, again, very interesting companies that maybe I would struggle to put a label on, but they are nevertheless very interesting. And finally, at the very end of the series, we will do a deep dive on the valuations. Now, there will be a table, the usual, the Panda. Well, I say that Panda, the tables predate Panda by about 15 years, right? I mean, I've been doing them a very long time. But there will be a very big sort of valuation slash ranking exercise at the very end, purely on the valuations and technicals sort of level in terms of growth, prices, valuations, dynamic, expectations of future growth, things like that. So I like doing these ranking exercises, and as much as they completely ignore all of the theory work in advance of it, I think they give you a very good and comprehensive understanding of what the market is thinking, right? Now, again, obviously the ranking approach varies, and I'm going to give sort of a detailed description of how I do it. Obviously, there is no right or wrong way of ranking stuff, right? And in terms of weighing ranks and in terms of number of parameters you want to pay attention to. Obviously, everyone's got their own special sauce of the people who do this sort of exercise, but I would continue to insist that it is a worthwhile exercise in its own right, simply on account of having a very good snapshot and understanding, okay, well, if you are weighing dynamics, growth versus value, where do the cards fall? How does it actually look if you're trying to weigh it all up? I can't say that this is my favorite exercise simply because I do like to understand the narrative. I do like to understand the where the industry is going, but we're going to spend the prior 14 articles on all of it. So I do feel like we can afford having one fun one to just purely focus on the technicals and the numbers, but that one will be at the very, very end. So stick around for that. Again, I'm confident that it'll keep us busy throughout August. I'm also confident that I'm not going to stop until it's done, right? So we're not gonna have articles drop out because I decided not to do them. No, all these things I laid out, two of them are the first two are more or less written. The other ones are in process. I'll continue working on them concurrently because that's how I like doing things. And as a result, over the course of August, you'll be receiving these articles probably two a week with an occasional third one because there are a couple slightly shorter ones that I will try and squeezing into weeks 2 and most likely 4. And then whatever is left for September. But rest assured, we will cover it all. And by the end of it, we're all going to be semiconductor experts, at least in Asia. Very, very excited for this. Like undertaking a project of this magnitude is important and it's interesting and it's exciting first and foremost, right? I mean, I may be a little bit boring like that, but I love this market stuff, right? And that's what That's my work, job, hobby, interest, call it, all of it really, right? And when you embark upon a new sector discovery like this, it really gets me going. So hopefully, as a result of all of this, we'll have a view on about 90 companies. Now, obviously, it's not going to be a detailed view, and of course, you're still going to have people who understand the technological nuances of all of this a little bit better, but at the very least, we'll all have a very solid grounding in all of it. And I think that will be a very reasonable level to be in to call yourself a person who understands the semiconductor industry in Greater China. With that, I bid you farewell. Once again, apologies for the kerfuffle with the attribution, but it happens unfortunately. Hopefully, this does not detract from your enjoyment of the blog. Always sort of happy to hear feedback on that and anything else. And yeah, can't wait to sort of get started on the semiconductor stuff. Expect the first article tomorrow morning. Have a very good day. Bye.